This afternoon, I'm in Richmond, Virginia, visiting with Roger Skalbeck, who is Associate Professor of Law and Associate Dean for Library and Information Services here at the University of Richmond. Roger, I appreciate you inviting me into your library today and for allowing us to do this session on camera for the oral history here in your office. It's an interesting setting. I noted in the background right behind you some of the bubble heads of the U.S. Supreme Court figures. And you said a few moments ago you have all but one of them at the
I have all but one, yes. Roberts is, I think, the most recent one that's been produced, and I haven't gotten up to D.C. recently to redeem my certificate.
Well,
everything else is
figure it out someplace along the way. It's not that far.
Yep.
Yes. Well, it's our custom to sort of begin these conversations by learning a little bit about you as a real person as opposed to just an academic law library director type or a colleague. Can you tell us a little bit about your life now and perhaps even when you were younger?
Yeah, so I've my life now, some of my interests and activities that I get into outside of work is I'm a really big board gamer. I love playing strategic board games, buying new ones, acquiring new ones. Gone to a couple conventions, mostly just excuses to play longer periods of time with other people interested in it. Big soccer fan, more to play and watch my kids play than necessarily watching things on TV. And grew up in Minnesota, so I have strong roots in Minnesota, family there, and affinity for the Vikings and other things there in town. And I love snow. I like water skiing. I like downhill skiing and cross country skiing. I had done from probably about 6 until 20 or so, like that. I can still do it, but not as much now.
Well, now that you're in Richmond, you're not probably going to see too much snowing around here for skiing, but you do have the mountains not far west of here, and maybe there's some spots up there or in West Virginia where you could go.
Yeah, we've gone to West Virginia, and actually a few years ago when there was record snow here, we had Snowpocalypse and Snowmageddon.
I remember the names.
Yeah,
it was convenient living elsewhere.
Yes. It was great because there was enough to actually do a lot of cross-country skiing at the time. Yeah, so we were living in D.C. at the time for that.
You're probably the only one who could get to work.
Exactly.
A lot of the commuters.
Yep.
If you could do it on skis. Well, sort of changing the focus now and looking at you as a professional law librarian and now director or associate dean, as they often are termed today.
Right.
I noted in doing the background that you have 3 degrees. Could you tell us what they were, Roger, and where you got each?
Yep. So my earliest I got at Macalester College. So I have a Bachelor of Arts in German Studies. I speak German fluently, still read occasionally, and unfortunately don't use it in my job, but find that good liberal arts education has gone a long way for that. Shortly after that, graduating at Macalester, I got my library degree from Rosary College, which was a joint degree program with the College of St. Catherine in St. Paul, and then you finished up your residency and got the degree from a school just outside of Chicago. Rosary at the time, and it's now called Dominican University.
I remember Rosary as a name because we had a number of colleagues who had gone to that school that I met early on in my career. And, I hadn't known about the school, but the name stuck pretty quickly.
Yeah, when I was in finishing my degree there, I did work at a law firm in downtown Chicago and got to know a lot of people who had gone through the program there. Because at the time, at least, distance education or online learning was, if not non-existent, certainly not widely participated in. So,
should you tell us a little more about that experience? That was your first job out of library school. You were a knowledge specialist?
Yeah. So I had, my first job out of library school, after I got my degree, I had finished for, I think, close to a year. I'd worked at Popham Hake, where I had also been a library assistant while in library school. And then soon after that particular firm was going through some challenges, and at one point it had been the 4th biggest law firm in Minnesota, and I think they lost 100 attorneys in a couple of years. And so it was definitely a lot of change, a lot of departures and things. So I was happy to move on from there to work at a specialized intellectual property firm that just did prosecution. So that's where I was a knowledge analyst at Schwegman, Lundberg, Fussner, and Kluth at the time.
Well, you were there for, what, about a year, and then moved to east to perhaps less snow, although not totally, as you mentioned earlier.
Yes,
it does
exactly.
come at Washington, D.C. area. And you were a systems librarian for the firm of Williams and Connolly for about another year, and then my notes indicate you were electronic services librarian for Howery, I think that was the name, Howery LLP at that time. It used to be Howery and Simon, but I think they've shortened the name. Could you talk a little bit about some of that work and the positions you held?
Yeah. So it was exciting moving from Minnesota to Washington, D.C. My wife had a 2-year fellowship, and she said, "Would you come along for the ride?" I said, "Yeah, I think there's a lot of lawyers and a lot of law libraries in D.C." So it was exciting coming out for that, and worked at Williams and Connolly, where it was a nice firm to work for. They did amazing work and just had one location. So it was nice because everything was there. You didn't have to deal with remote offices, different time zones in terms of finding time to work with colleagues, and they had fascinating work they were doing. I was there for a little over a year and then got recruited just down the street to the other side of the Metro Center Metro exit in Washington, D.C., and worked then for Howery for a little over a year, I think, there as well.
So you commuted presumably on Metro?
Yeah, exactly.
You just didn't have to change stations.
Yeah,
well,
it really
was
did.
convenient. You just had to know which door to go out.
Yep, exactly.
What direction to point.
In fact, my experience in 17 years living in the D.C. area was I never really had to drive very much. People say, "Oh, isn't it bad living in D.C. with the traffic?" And I had the luxury or good fortune of being able to take Metro to work fairly regularly.
I came down from D.C. to this area last night, and it was probably early evening when I headed out, and I remember coming around the Beltway from Silver Spring in Maryland down to the south to come down the Interstate 95 that heads in this direction, and traffic was quite heavy on the Beltway at 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, and I now have one of those transponders for Easy Pass, and I just jumped into the toll lanes, and there wasn't too much traffic in the toll lanes, and I got just through fine until I started south, and the toll lanes on that highway are not open until rush hour, so that wasn't rush hour.
That is the challenge,
So it was a little heavier, but we kept moving, unfortunately.
That's good.
It worked well. Somewhere along the way, you've obviously made a decision to become a law librarian, Roger. Could you tell us a little bit about that process, and specifically, did anyone play a role in it?
Yeah. It was, I think, a combination of happy circumstance, good fortune, and I guess, a confluence of circumstances. And it almost didn't happen, actually. Right out, one of the jobs that I had in college as a work-study student was checking in the mail at my library. So I showed up and I worked several hours a week checking in magazines and periodicals, scientific literature and things, and graduated with my German degree, wondering what to do next. I saw a job listing for a law firm library assistant checking in the mail, and I was pretty excited that I pretty much nailed all of the job requirements for that position.
Sounds like you were a very experienced mail checker.
Yes, exactly, very experienced. But the reason it almost didn't work out is I had applied for it through a government job placement agency. I think it was Job Search US or something at the time, and got a rejection letter. It was one of these automated things where I think that they had sort of over-aggressively, from maybe the Human Resources Department or through a system thing, sent out a notification to applicants. And I thought, well, that's strange. I have 100% of the qualifications. Within 2 days of the rejection letter, I got the call to come in for an interview. And I was not quick on my feet, I said, "Oh, I thought you rejected me." When I should have just said, absolutely, I'll come in."
Mm-hmm.
But
Too much information.
yeah, exactly. Yes.
Sharing.
But that didn't doom things. I went in for the interview, did wonderfully, had a wonderful experience working there at Popham Hake in downtown Minneapolis, and it was basically the influence of that experience and the experience of working in a special library at a law firm that led me to starting at the library program at the College of St. Catherine.
Mm-hmm. Well, that all sounds like it was sort of an interesting era in your life, probably footloose and fancy-free too, compared to where one gets after a few more years with a family and everybody else until. Yes. Well, you were with the law firm world for a long time, but in about 2000, you left the private law sector and sort of drifted into academic law librarianship as the Technology Services Librarian, I believe is your title, at George Mason School of Law in just across the river from Washington, D.C. Can you talk about that? You were there, 6 years? You earned your law degree along that way, and at Mason. Could you talk a little bit about what you did there and some of those experiences?
Yeah. So when I started at Mason, that was sort of when I shifted from the private firm world to academia. I do miss the private firm experience. I miss the clients, the reality of we have real world problems, we're applying the law, researching it, and things like that. But I really appreciate the both broader depth and involvement of things in the academic side. When I was at Mason, the title, what it represented was I was kind of the chief technology sort of strategist at the law school. I helped run our website. I did a lot of things that were working on data management and access and things like that, and helped with basically kind of a jack of all trades of assisting faculty publishing their scholarship, getting things online, and doing pretty much a variety of strategic things with data and access to that for the law school. And the more traditional things as well, which was integrating databases, selecting which resources we were using, helping troubleshoot access issues and things like that.
Well, I noticed in 2011 you were appointed an adjunct professor at Georgetown. Was that before you came there as a librarian or after?
It was after.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was.
I know it's. I apologize.
That's
I'm
all right.
A little flawed because I was obviously a slipshod in putting them together. But I knew you were at Georgetown about then, but I wasn't sure because you were hired by Bob Oakley.
Yeah, exactly. So I did work with Bob Oakley for 6 or 7 months, I think, before he passed away, unfortunately. And he was wonderful to work for, a great mentor for the time that I knew him, and it was a great experience. Yep.
I'm sitting here glancing back at this, and the notes are just fine I'm using. I skipped the paragraph in my rush to get to this question, no doubt.
Yes.
So I did notice that. But you were there until you came here in 2015.
Yep.
You want to talk a little bit about your work at Georgetown? I mean, that's a pretty sophisticated and very large law library. And,
it really is. Yeah.
And you had some wonderful colleagues in work with whom you directly worked, and of course around town too, I think. Yeah, the experience at Georgetown was really unmatched in terms of both the breadth and the variety of experiences and platforms and resources that we got to work with. The student body size is pretty immense, and the number of faculty that are there is pretty impressive. So there's a lot of high caliber work going on, but the nice thing is that there's also a lot of depth to the experiences and breadth to the staff that's available. So people can really specialize in some very particular areas on executing things for organizing things in the law, developing projects, and trying to really do things that go beyond just
providing the services that are needed for today or answering the questions as they come in. A lot more is anticipatory of, well, what are the services needed down the road, and what are ways that we can build systems and create tools for interacting with materials that are more efficient, more effective, or at times more enjoyable.
Well, as I started this part of the discussion after skipping a paragraph in my foolishness here, you were also an adjunct professor. Could you talk a little bit about specifically what that was all about?
Yeah. So at Georgetown, after I'd been working there as an associate librarian for a couple of years, I wanted to get teaching experience, both for the experience, but also to be involved in the delivery of education. I initially thought that I would work on a fairly traditional area of teaching an advanced legal research course or law skills for practice or something like that. The good thing about Georgetown is we have a deep bench, and there was a lot of well-experienced people. The bad thing is it's hard to break in if people have those positions and are doing really well at them. There was only so many things we could add. So what I started to do was look into ways that I could get involved in something that I was doing at pretty much every job since I started in the law library profession, which is technology. So I looked around to see, were there courses that were existing, and were there developments or initiatives underway at Georgetown in that area. And it turned out that a professor had just come from New York Law School. Her name is Tanina Rothstein, and she was starting a course that she had taught at NYLS for the first time, teaching it at Georgetown, and that was called Technology, Innovation, and Law Practice. And so I partnered with her to teach that every spring for, I think, the 3 years that was the last 3 years that I was at Georgetown. And with that, we introduced students to the ways that technology is innovating law practice, and then that evolved into a project-driven course where students started building theoretical projects and ended up building actual projects for clients that met sort of on-the-ground needs for those people.
Well, that must have been a very well-received course by many students, because that's, especially post the so-called Great Recession of 2008, it's a whole new world out there for somebody in the law firm world, as well as here in the academy, in many ways. And it sounds like the skills that you were imparting were the sort that would be very useful for them to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it was a good combination of the sort of systems understanding technical skills. You didn't need to write code, you didn't need to come in with that proficiency, but you left with an appreciation for it. And that was coupled with skills, some of the more soft skills. Everybody had to work on a team, and towards the end of it, which is a component they continue with, is everybody had to deliver something for a particular client based on an actual need. So there was the soft skills of compassion, empathy, communication, which really have nothing to do with technology, but they're all done in the framework of building these systems that help to scale delivery of services.
If you were to look around at people you would consider mentors in the field, assuming there are some, I assume there might be some colleagues along the way, and perhaps not just in the academic, but even in the pre-academic period of your career. Do you have any that come to mind in any of those settings that you'd like to mention?
Sure. So my earliest mentors were my immediate supervisor, Beth Peterson, who worked at Popham Hake, and I think she went on to be the director at the Idaho State Law Library. She's passed on, I think, a few years ago. But she was a great person to work with initially, from the minutia of politely correcting me that my title was library assistant, not assistant librarian, that I had misused.
Politely correcting you.
Yes.
Gently, huh?
In my first week, she was reviewing correspondence I was sending to, I don't know, somebody like CCH or
terrible how these
somebody.
Computers can rearrange the words.
I know,
you type.
exactly. I'd gotten an upgrade in title without knowing it. But she was very nice at that. So Beth Peterson was a great mentor, sort of guiding me in terms of understanding what the profession was and how to appreciate it. And then in the law firm world, worked with, there were a number of colleagues within LLSTC, which is a community that I got involved with early on. And Elmo Dadalo was one, so I worked with him a fair amount, and a variety of people on the firm side. And a lot of them I saw as colleagues, whether it was through my work on the board at LLSTC or other things. A lot of it was, well, what are you doing as peers and how are we developing things? And then moving into the academic world, I think, I always looked to, the director of the library as a good ally, and one strong ally and continuing mentor for me has been Peggy Fry, who worked at, for many, many years as the assistant. She was the associate librarian for administration at Georgetown. And people looked at Bob and said, how did you do such amazing things? Well, he had the national vision. He had sort of the worldview of things. She ran the operations of all of the other things that happened behind the scenes and knew.
In other words, they were a good team.
They were a very good team, yeah.
Because Bob was all those years worked as the sort of, I think he had his other day job. Which was as the government affairs representative.
Exactly. Yeah. And so
Peggy was. I always thought of that as pretty much a full-time job on the side.
It definitely was, yeah.
So Peggy kept the place running.
Yeah,
she did. I think we all sort of knew that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I was there also when Mary Alice was still at Georgetown.
Okay.
So I saw the transition when the Washington Affairs Office changed to be the Government Relations Office, and also the transition where they moved away from being geographically located at Georgetown and things. So,
well, progress perhaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, change at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Very much.
Yeah.
Well, you've been here, one academic year now? Or?
A couple months into year 2 now.
Yeah, with a huge long-term experience. You want to talk a little bit about what things are going on with you here at the University of Richmond?
Yeah. So the exciting thing is now year 2, which means not everything is a case of first impression, which was the challenge in the first 12 months.
The first year.
I survived the first year. Exactly. Yeah. And the nice thing is now we can kind of get into a rhythm of understanding both the patterns of activity at this school and also understanding the differences and the unique qualities of the students and where they're working and involved. And the other advantage to this, or a nice feature to this opportunity, is that working with the faculty here is a great experience. They all love teaching. We all love to talk about how are we teaching, what are we teaching, how can we be more effective. So it's a great community that's focused on that piece that I didn't have the lens into in previous positions. So it's a good way to understand what people's pursuits are and their interests here.
Well, you're no longer taking the metro to work, because I didn't see one in the neighborhood when I drove up.
There is that, yes.
Are you able to live fairly close?
Yeah, so...
Are you still getting to work without a car, or isn't it quite that close?
It is that close, yeah.
It is?
So when I worked at George Mason, door to door, from my house to the front door of the law school, was 384 steps.
Wow.
So... that was
but who's counting?
Yeah, but who's counting? I figured I should know at one point. And so that helped me survive both going to law school and my wife having our first child and working full time.
Wow.
And then here, I do miss the sidewalks and I do miss the subways, but I am walkable to work. So.
Well, I imagine you don't miss the traffic on the gridlock on the Beltway all the time, although there probably is a fair amount of that on the one around Richmond too.
Yeah, there's a little around here. Yeah. But, it's new places, new experiences, which is good.
Why not?
Yeah.
Now, are you teaching at this point here, or do you have thoughts about doing so?
Yeah, so I'm teaching in the law skills program. So we have for the entire first year, the 1L year, we have a combined research and writing curriculum where there's 5 sections, the way we have it structured now, of students, and each section has a partner of a writing professor and a research professor. So I teach one of those sections, and that's in the fall and the spring, where I teach the research, and then we combine an effort on the writing piece of it to make sure they're researching things to find whatnot. And then in addition to that, in the spring, I'm teaching an advanced legal research course, which we're converting into an experiential course, which has a big writing component to it. So it's both substantive work in a variety of areas of legal research, but the work is done in the service of output, the service of documenting what you found, structuring your output, and understanding how the documents are put together for adaptability, for repurposing, or being able to craft things differently.
Again, it sounds like it's going to be imparting some skills that could be very useful in the
Yep.
real world when the students are there
Right.
After graduation.
Yeah, a big thing I'm hoping to do with that is to model it as if the students were in a general practice law firm. So each week we'll have an assignment that comes in that says this is what came in, or general practice, so we cover a variety of subject areas, and then try to, with every assignment, allow people to, or require people to either revise or refine the assignments that they're doing. So it'll be expanding what they're doing, or saying, well, you found this much, let's take a look at that and try to focus a little bit more on the outputs, or make sure that we understand that the audience reading this needs to consume it in a certain way.
Roger, you have not been in the profession terribly long by the standards that somebody like myself would have, although I don't know if that's a fair test. But you've been active, quite active in professional leadership and other aspects of it. You were on the board of directors for a while, and then later president of the D.C. chapter of the Law Librarian Society of Washington, D.C. You've been involved as the board of directors for the Center for Computer Assisted Legal Instruction, or CALI as we call it, and in other organizations. Would you like to talk about some of your professional service?
Sure. I think service is a core value and expectation of people being involved in the profession. Service comes in a number of different ways. For me, I think a big part of it has been volunteering, not for everything. I have found a way to say no sometimes, but volunteering in a way that can help build community, help create connections and relationships, and also just find shared territory of things that people think are valuable and find are worth pursuing collaboratively. So LLSDC, I found the great thing there was we had a strong group of people and a large number of people in a close geographic area. So there it was developing relationships with people, understanding educational goals, and knowing we were all kind of in it together. Our law firms, when I was on the firm side, may have been on opposite sides of a particular piece of litigation or interaction, but we never saw ourselves as competitors in that sense. So
that's a characteristic I think many of us share in our niche of the legal profession or the library profession, and that we don't see each other as competitors in any kind of a negative sense. I mean, we're all, I'm sure, very discreet when necessary with information, but we still share extensively and help each other.
Right.
That's something that I keep hearing is very much still the norm, even a few years after my own retirement.
That's good to hear.
Up until then.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Well, I noted that you were actually a current committee member for ALL chair. That's this year's.
That's this year.
I'm sitting here worried about my notes because I put this thing together over the summer, and the roles often change come midsummer with. So you're chairing what is it here?
It's the national.
I'll just ask you because I can't. I'm looking quickly at the notes and I don't see it jumping at me.
Sure. So I'm chairing a committee that's focused on delivering a specific conference in December. So it's
I know it was a special thing.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's a one-time thing. It's the National Conference on Copyright in State Legal Materials. So it originated in conversations between Emily Feltrin, who's the Director of Government Relations, and I think Ron Wheeler, who's the current president, and a few others, sort of looking at current litigation and some legislation in the area of state statutes. There's activity in Georgia, there's been things active in Colorado, a little bit interesting in Florida and other areas where it's not clear that state legal materials are free of copyright because they're not under the federal law, and it's not clear that we'll have open access to, the source law of state government. So what we're doing is pulling together people to focus on education, inspiration, and conversation to look at issues of copyright and state legal materials.
I imagine that could be a game changer if they say a state were to assert copyright protections and the courts backed them up. And suddenly what we thought was public domain may not be.
Yeah.
And lots of it might not be.
Yep.
That could be. Sounds like this conference could be a very interesting beginning, at least, to taking a hard look at some of these issues.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it is, we hope that there is never this thing where the law in and of itself is protected and prevented from free access, but more than trying to sort of focus on the legal interpretation, we're trying to get it so that people are inspired by creating new tools, finding new relationships, and making new uses of the law such that there's no reason that you would want to protect it. In fact, you want to make it more available through things like application programming interface connections or bulk data access or programmatic feeds and things.
What I suspect might be somebody who could suggest to the state officers that this would be a good idea to protect this would be someone to whom they've licensed its sale.
Yes, exactly.
Trying to convince them, in effect, to put up some bars to competitors.
Yeah, that's right.
Why not?
Yeah.
If you can get away with it, I guess.
Right. Well, it's interesting because here in Virginia, this is a complex issue because here in Virginia, our official code has annotations in it, which are pretty useful. You look at the statute and you can connect it directly to cases that interpret the statute. The challenge is that that's a contract with Lexis, and if I want to make the copies of that directly from the books and make it available, well, those are editorial enhancements that we have to account for. The sort of good situation from that is that under statute in Virginia, every college gets a copy of the code, and there's a variety of other people that receive it. So bare minimum access to the law and the annotated value-added pieces there. It's not quite there, though, for the electronic access and sort of the efficient way that we wish there was.
So they'll give you a paper copy? Is that what they do?
Yeah, they give you a paper copy.
But if you want the one everyone uses today, you need to make a deal with the company.
Yeah, it's not quite that. I mean, effectively, that's how it works out. You can log in to read the statutes directly online for Virginia and other states that have this relationship, but it's not. It's designed to be programmatically difficult to get to the materials typically. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's business.
That is business, exactly. Yeah. Follow the money, I once heard. And so
yes, I've heard the same thing someplace or other.
Yeah.
Now, you have written a bit in the field, especially in the areas of legal research technologies. You want to talk a little more broadly about that?
Sure. I've found, in addition to being active in committees and things like that, I love to write. I love to pick things apart, analyze them, research them, understand features, efficiencies, sort of hidden aspects of tools, platforms, and things like that. And so the venue I found for doing this has typically been publishing online and in print. So I did a series with LLRX where it was, I think, notes from the technology trenches, and I did a series that continued the similar theme with the chapter publication Law Library Lights through LLSDC, and both of those were columns looking at technology. And primarily it was trying to look at what are the new tools that are out there, how can they be used, what are some issues with them, and how do people understand how to use them beyond just your first glance impression or your first sort of path to accessing materials.
Well, I think you have just sort of explained what I suspect your role as a law librarian, or in any role of a law librarian or other type of librarian is today in the real world. And I'll use that as a segue into asking you to talk a little bit about what you see as a profession, where we're going, where you think your own library might be headed, now that we're sort of in the post so-called Great Recession era. And as Frank Kodak has described it, those troubling or trying times, challenging times, I think is one of his words, that legal education and legal practice specifically face today. You want to put on your speculation hat?
Sure, yeah.
See what you think the future looks like in the near term,
Yep.
perhaps?
So I think in terms of libraries, one of the challenges is connecting users with resources and understanding what they're doing with them. And at the very basic level, we may be acquiring large new databases, we're getting huge digitized resources, we may have compilations of ebooks and a variety of other things. We need to figure out what is the way that we get from knowledge inquiry to information delivery or knowledge delivery. How do we get from the question to the resources that provide not just the answer, but the context to the answer and a method of arriving at that answer? If you don't know how people get from point A to point B, or all you know is sort of some raw metrics of, well, this title was accessed a certain number of times in a year, or this thing was done this way, it's really not very effective use of your resources to know where your money is best spent. So the challenge there is figuring out, how do we connect people to that? How do we get the narrative that explains to people why one resource is superior to another, or why one resource that might not have been anticipated in trying to solve a problem might actually be able to provide it, and it could give it to you in a new way, could give it to you in a new format or things like that. So I think that's a big challenge we have large acquisition budgets, we continue to acquire things, we're shifting from an ownership model to often a license or access model. Well, what happens on renewal? How do we know what's happening with our money? And if budgets are tight, how do we decide what should get money and what should be either withdrawn from the collection, canceled, or maybe withheld from a renewal? Those kind of things. That's a big challenge.
Our colleague at University of Memphis, D.R. Jones, has written a bit about some of the aspects of the new reality of access to material through digital or licensing arrangements versus the traditional method of just owning it and putting it on the shelf in book form. And some of the challenges there that libraries face, especially in trying to pool resources and make available outside of their own borders some of that information as we used to in the past. And so the challenges your generation face are going to be interesting at best.
They are.
But I imagine you'll beat every one of them and end up with a superior final result than has been possible up until now.
And I think one thing we'll want to keep focus on is recognizing what those challenges are and anticipating how we can best collaborate and communicate as colleagues, library to library, librarian to librarian, and in a way that's responsive to our internal needs, whether those are budgetary, whether they're maybe more structural or something else, but also respectful of and cognizant of kind of the overall broader corporate interests at play and the business environment that things exist in. Not every decision to raise prices, to change plans is borne out by ill intent, but every decision like that will have impacts.
Yeah.
So it's figuring out how do we collectively either anticipate or respond, and hopefully it's a combination of both. Yeah.
Well, it sounds, Roger, like the era that you're going to be part of, and already are, is going to be very challenging but very exciting. And,
Definitely.
there are some possibilities of, for some real strides and forward in what we can provide and how we do it as a profession of law librarians.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, and the thing I'll say too is that it's really impressive how much things have changed since I first started my first job to what it is today, and how much things have kind of stayed the same.
Yeah.
The first day on the job, we were dealing with relatively mundane things. We weren't yet on the internet. We didn't have email. Shepherd's was still available on Westlaw and things like that.
In paper form.
In paper form, exactly.
People
People were
as
like,
well as on Westlaw.
yeah, people are like, "Where's the supplement?" Because they would have to check, and I knew how to shepherdize in paper before I ever started at law school.
Red bound supplement and the little thin one.
Yep. And who's got the white paper advance sheet for the shepherds? Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yep.
it had its own challenges,
Yeah.
but today's do too. And
Yeah.
in some ways, it's at least some of the stuff it's been reinvented out of some of the old hassles.
Right.
Now you probably have new ones
Yep.
as a result. Oh
Yeah.
well, that's progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my first weeks on the reference desk and at this job, my very first job, somebody says, "Do we have an encyclopedia of law for Minnesota?" I thought, that's the weirdest thing. Why would they have like a Encyclopedia Britannica equivalent to the law? I didn't realize at the time that, why, yes, we did. It was called Donnell's, and it was the Bible for people that practice.
Yeah.
And earlier today, we had our students in this law skills course looking at the Encyclopedia for Law for Illinois as the jurisdiction we're using this semester. So this many years later, you still have these structural ways to help people solve problems and access the law.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, fresh out of the experiences you'd had before you went into the law firm, you thought of an encyclopedia in a whole different way, as many people would. But yes, they had taken the concept and put together summaries of the law and the jurisdiction for which it applied, or the national if it was AMJUR or CJS.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we're probably getting near the end of today's conversation for our oral history, Roger, but before we do, it's customary to ask if there's anything we've not talked about that you would like to bring up.
I think we've covered some good ground today.
Fortunately, that is an answer I hear a lot,
Yes,
so maybe
yes.
we do a thorough job. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I've been in it a few years more than I sometimes remember, but I look forward to another decade or two, or we'll see
Or
beyond
maybe a
that.
tad more.
Exactly,
You're
that's
still,
right.
Well, it's all relatively speaking.
It's all
but,
relative,
I
exactly.
consider you still a younger gentleman,
Right.
a younger colleague.
Yep. Yeah.
But then I'm in my mid-70s, and I have a brother-in-law who's in his 93 years old, and I consider myself a kid around.
Yeah, there we go.
It's all relative.
Yep, exactly.
Perspective.
Yep.
Well, maybe with that said, Roger, I should thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
In this conversation, and in thanking you, I'm thanking you not only on my own behalf, but also on behalf of your former boss at Georgetown, Michelle Wu, Frank Hodek, and Dick Spinelli, who are colleagues with whom I have the pleasure of working to put together the oral history of law librarianship for Hein Online.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.